Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp. This is No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Russell Moore and David French. David is a New York Times opinion columnist. Russell is the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. Russell and David are certainly among the most, either on the one hand, loved and respected, or on the other hand, denounced and unappreciated commentators on religion and politics. I've long respected and appreciated the integrity that they have brought to their work in the world and have been grateful for having conversations with them a number of times through the years and getting to know them both here in Nashville. It's a great conversation, very helpful, I think, about our current context. We're also discussing their recent project called The After Party, which is an attempt to reframe the ways in which we're having conversations about Christianity and politics. Enjoy. Russell Moore, editor-in-chief at Christianity Today, director of Christianity Today's Public Theology Project, was named in 2017 to Politico magazine's list of top 50 influence makers in Washington. Russell was president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention from 2013 to 2021. Prior to that role, he served as provost and dean of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, where he also taught theology and ethics. Welcome, Russell.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. David French joined the New York Times as an opinion columnist in January 2023. Before that, he was a senior editor at The Dispatch, which he helped start, and a contributing writer at The Atlantic. David spent most of his career as a practicing lawyer, working in both commercial and constitutional litigation. In his late 30s, he joined the United States Army Reserve as a judge advocate general, was deployed to Iraq in 2007, for which he was awarded a Bronze Star. And in the interest of full disclosure, David is also these days one of my colleagues as a faculty member at Lipscomb University in Nashville, where we were both also undergrads. And if I remember correctly, lived in the same dorm for a while. Welcome,
lived in
David.
the same dorm. We were in the same social club, which is the Lipscomb version of fraternity.
Yes, all sorts of trouble we may have gotten into way back then. So, welcome. Glad to have both of you guys here with us today. So, for those who may not know kind of some of your story, how would you narrate challenges and change that you've weathered over the last decade, let's say? Can you kind of do that in any sort of brief, coherent narrative? Russell, you want to give that a shot?
Well, I think that part of it is the kind of shaking of everything that has happened in American life. So I think over the last 10 years, there were a lot of people who thought, okay, we're all together, we're doing the right thing. Here's this category in my tribe, and there's that group over there, and that's their tribe. And all of that has been remixed in a lot of ways. So the things that we thought would divide those categories aren't actually, turns out, what are the divisions now. Yeah. And so I'm somebody who grew up and lived in a denominational context, Southern Baptist context, very, very deeply embedded in that, and am no longer still an evangelical Christian, committed Christian, but not in my denominational home context. And a lot of issues that seem to be separate, but actually I think are related. So the politicization that's happening within the church right now and with other sectors of American life, racial justice questions, and sexual abuse questions. Those things I think are actually coming from much of the same source, and that has divided up a lot of the traditional alliances.
And then what is this? Can you give just a glimpse to folks of what this has kind of meant for you personally?
Well, it meant a kind of exile from, I really haven't changed in terms of my basic framework of what I think at all, but a lot of the people that I worked with and served with have changed, and now I'm a liberal in their minds, even though I hold the same views that I always did.
Yeah. David, how would you summarize kind of the last categories of the last decade?
You know, Russell and I have lived parallel lives to an extent in different denominations. So I was 10 years ago in the PCA, and felt like it fit me like a glove, to be frank. So I'm conservative politically, I'm conservative theologically, conservative culturally. There's I was what you might call a full spectrum conservative. And also I was a Republican. In 2012, I was a Romney delegate to the Republican National Convention. Gosh, I was Republican going all the way back to the Reagan days when I came of age as a Reagan conservative. And Lee, I think I was even on the right leaning side of Lipscomb, maybe politically, even when we were there back in 87. I was, I believe, a year after you. And so I felt very much at home. And then in 2015, Donald Trump comes down the escalator and everything changed. And no one was more surprised by this than me. And I feel like, ever since I've been thinking, what did I miss? I've been examining myself. What was I blind to? Was I the fish that didn't know it was wet and sort of swimming in a culture that was different than what I thought it was? But what I would say is very similar to Russell is I didn't change in my theology. I didn't change in my political point of view. I remained a committed civil libertarian dedicated to free speech. I remained a pro-life advocate. And also, very critically, this is something that never caused a problem in GOP circles before. I remained an advocate for the importance of character in public officials. Because to me, my political conservatism really had two components to it. It had a ideological component and a characterological component, so to speak. That in essence, what the United States, what's best for this country are people who are men and women of integrity, applying a particular ideology that I believed best reflects and would best lead to justice and human flourishing in the United States. But the integrity component was not optional. It was not optional. And so I will never forget, sort of sounding the alarm in late 2015, early 2016, appealing to documents and principles that had been clearly and unequivocally articulated during the Clinton era, and thinking I was going to get some sort of positive reception to it, and absolutely the opposite, just absolutely the opposite. And then it's only gotten worse since. And what I would also say is that if you maintain a more civil libertarian approach to the First Amendment, to religious free exercise, et cetera, you are going to be increasingly distant from the contemporary Republican Party. If you retain, say, a Reagan conservative view, sort of the power of our alliances and the importance of NATO and resisting Russian aggression, you're going to be more distant from the Republican Party. And both sides then look at each other and say, "What happened to you?"
Yeah. This is one quick follow-up, and it's almost an impossible question. And so if you must pass, then pass. But I think that there's so much kind of cognitive dissonance. There's so much confusion with people just trying to make sense of what the heck is really going on. If you had to give like a 2 to 3 sentence, what is all of this that we find ourselves in the midst of boiled down to in 2 to 3 minutes? In 2 to 3 sentences.
2 to 3 sentences for what is going on in the universe?
Yeah, in the American political scene.
Well, I think you had groups of people who were doing the same thing, but now it's revealed were coming from completely different motivations. And as one commentator put it, that we realized that the things that we thought were central and the things we thought were peripheral actually were reversed in some of those alliances. And I know a lot of the things that I would have argued, well, that's a caricature. So, for instance, I would spend a lot of my time saying, those of you who say that churches who want to have more traditional gender roles are misogynistic, that's just a complete caricature, not the case. Now I look and say, oh, there's a significant portion of people who actually were motivated by very hostile misogyny toward women. We've seen that in sexual abuse crisis and in other places. So I think there's been kind of an apocalypse and unveiling of that. in many ways. And I think you also have with the breakdown of the institutions. So you can see this in the Republican Party. You can see it in a lot of the Christian denominations. The breakdown of the institutions has led to a kind of mob rule that's been fueled by social media. And so there's this illusion that, for instance, someone asked me the other day about Donald Trump reaching out to evangelical leaders. And I say he doesn't have to, because the myth is that you reach the evangelical leaders and the evangelical leaders reach their constituencies. That is how it used to work. Donald Trump can go right around the leaders and mobilize his base, and the evangelical leaders are afraid of the followers, so they will adjust accordingly.
Yeah.
That's happened in almost every institution.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I just want to point this out, not get commentary yet. If you want to come back to it later, that'd be great. But you use the language of apocalyptic unveiling there, and, and typically in biblical literature, apocalyptic is the unveiling of forces out there. But you're kind of pointing to apocalyptic unveiling of the church itself, which is maybe an interesting twist.
Well, I think it's both. I think there's an unveiling of all kinds of factors that are affecting the church and other institutions that we never realized were there. And I think some of that has to do with especially in my more conservative evangelical world, there was this sense that the outside world is affected with this faulty worldview, and they're the ones who are accommodating to the culture. Now I think what we've seen is that we were accommodating to a culture even more than the people we were arguing against, because when the Apostle Paul says in the Bible, "Be not conformed to the world," you can just as easily accommodate to a subculture as you can to a larger culture, and that's what happened in evangelicalism.
Now, Russell got more than 2 or 3 sentences.
I'm sorry.
But if
I'm grateful. That gave me time. It gave me some time to think about this. So I'm going to go with, if I'm going to go with 2 or 3 sentences, I'm going to go back to the Yeats poem, Second Coming.
Mm-hmm.
The center does not hold. The best, what is the worst are full of passionate intensity, and the best lack all conviction. This is what is happening all over the place. And this goes to the institutional point that Russell was talking about. In many cases, because the best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity, who wins these internal conflicts? The worst, those who are full of passionate intensity. And what we're beginning to see is really a part of a movement is motivated by true hatred. I mean, I'm talking when it comes to things like the misogyny that Russell was talking about. We have seen in my former denomination, the PCA, there are a remnant of Kenists and outright sort of white nationalists that are along the fringes. We've seen that some in the Southern Baptist Convention. We have seen that there is an element that is motivated by what you would call sort of true hatred and bigotry. But there's a larger element that's really motivated by fear.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is because that larger element is motivated by fear, they have this overwhelming fear of the left. They're incredibly vulnerable to the voices, the most strident voices. And they're also incredibly reluctant to do anything about those strident voices because they don't want to weaken the coalition. They don't want to weaken themselves in the face of a hostile world. And so there's the circle the wagons mentality, and they're not, there's this concept you've heard sometimes online, no enemies to the right, that it's fatally weakening us. It's weakening us if we do anything about some of these really vengeful and malicious forces. And so that's how you get into a place where in many ways, almost the worst elements become the dominant voice. And the larger group of people who in many ways don't like that. They don't like the rhetoric, they don't like the ideas, but they have a greater concern for the left. And so they will not do one thing to sort of eliminate that, to ameliorate the harm or to prevent the harm caused by those voices. And it acts like a one-way ratchet. It's just towards extremism and towards extremism.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add to that is I think it's a fear not only of the left, but it is a fear of the far right as well.
For sure.
And specifically the fear is of being called the left.
Yes.
And so the message is you're not really one of us if you are critiquing something that we're doing. And so there's this psychological sense of, okay, well, let's give people what they want a little bit, and then they'll settle down and get on board, and we can go back to doing what we were called to do.
All right.
And that just isn't happening.
Yep. So, I mean, what you guys are pointing to there is a fundamental question about whether or not we have sufficient character formation to be able to have conviction, right, and to act out of conviction,
right,
and to call things that formerly we would have called fundamentally unjust or fundamentally unfair or fundamentally social exercises of hatred what they are, right? So what hope do you have of, in the kind of consumerist world that we're in, of there being sufficient forces, possibilities for the kind of character formation that we need today?
I mean, there is, let me preface this by contrasting my Twitter feed and my inbox. Okay. So the Twitter feed, Twitter and social media world it's full of the people who are sort of who are the most committed, most activist subset of Americans. And they are highly aggressive. They are highly polarized. They're immovable and often quite malicious. And so you could go on to Twitter and look at the responses to Russell, look at the responses to me, and think that, and it would be, if that's your snapshot, you would think that the church is full of militantly, potentially even flirting with violence, militant Christians who are essentially wanting to launch sort of a new crusade to transform America from the ground up as a Christian nation, often tinged with white nationalism. And you would think that, wow,